Welcome to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. This is live Monday Newswire, joined by my esteemed producer, Alex. Today, we're going to dive into this latest mandate, and I use the term mandate because it was mandated by Andrew Jassy, the CEO of Amazon, that they are going to return to office effective January 2025. So we're going to dig into what does this RTO, return to office mandate, mean? Why are companies utilizing it? Is it a thing of the past or is it an egregious oversight? That's part of the commentary I believe that we're going to discuss today. But Alex, good to be here with you.
Happy Monday.
Yeah.
September 23rd.
Your Jets win.
Jets
All
win. Browns, we don't have to talk about that.
No, that's okay. That's all right. The
Well,
Buckeyes
boy,
won, so it's all good.
Okay, yeah. Oh, they're a powerhouse. But
Buckeyes.
yeah, I mean, Andy Jassy, CEO, wants employees. I believe it's starting in January of 2025 for a 5-day work week. Going back
around the globe. This is
globally.
not
1.5 million employees, like massive. Obviously, Amazon. Everyone's heard of Amazon. Return back to the office. And there's articles you can read everywhere about what's going on and what's happening. And employees seem upset about this, as maybe they should be, because there's just so many elements that go into giving employees flexibility, especially nowadays where you see job performance is high and people perform well, but giving them the flexibility to work from home, not having to commute, to spend time with kids, to do all the things that they need to do in their life, and to trust them to do the things they need to do for work. And now going back, basically pre-COVID, what is it, 4 years ago now? Basically over 4 years ago, mandate of having to go to the office and eliminating a lot of the flexibility that maybe young parents, people just in general have to be able to work from home at least, because I think they have a 3-day a week mandate.
So
right now.
What I've read and what you're indicating is a lot of what I see as the misconception.
Right. Okay.
Because it's the idea that, I am locked in my office 5 days a week. I'm there from 8 to 5 regardless. And as what I've read in the memorandum from Andrew Jassy was not that. It was not that. It was a return to operations that they had pre-COVID, which was, hey, if you have something going on, that's okay. But the expectation is that you're not just kind of, the expectation is come into the office. But if you have a doctor's appointment, if you have a sick kid, if you have those things, that's okay. Those things happen. That is directly what he pointed out as, remember, this is what the policy was.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting as we get into this. I believe there's a couple things at play here.
Okay.
I think it is, we've struggled to really engage a culture when a lot of people don't want to be here. We've hired employees or we've allowed employees that have kind of managed this, I'm not going to be in the office. And so we don't have a great way to build a culture and get people engaged. So the only way we know how to effectively do that is to make people be in the office. Okay, so that's the first one, is that there's an oversight on how do we actually build relationships, connections, culture. What are we doing to facilitate relationships that largely are best done in person, but that we're not doing regularly enough to make sure. So are we taking time during our work week to say, hey, we're going to have just a connection time. We're going to have our managers and our leaders make sure they're doing things to connect. They're not doing that. So the solution, as many companies says, hey, just force people to come back in the office. It's kind of a mask, a Band-Aid to a bad leadership style of, I don't know how to best engage and lead people. So if in the office, I'll stumble upon it and be a better leader. So I think that's what's going on first.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of variables to it, and going to the leadership area. There in one of the articles, I can't remember if it was Entrepreneur, or Forbes, or Inc., but they had mentioned that when they first went back to a 3-day a week work week, there was a lot of confusion. Right, some
Yeah.
managers said,
Yep.
yeah, but not really. And
Yep.
others said, no, you have to go. So it does seem like there's a lot of, miscommunication or just not great
Totally.
communication
Yeah.
happening and trickling down from
Yeah.
executives to management.
Well, I think what can happen there is, the idea is, hey, we'll go back to 3 days a week. Okay, great. Well, what 3 days? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday,
Friday.
Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. Like what works? And my
Right.
guess is based upon some managers and their own personal schedule. They probably, and maybe leadership is like, hey, we can't mandate like which days, just 3 days.
Well,
And so then that led confusion corporately. And like one gentleman they interviewed, he was working remote and he was in an area and were technically reports to an office that none of the rest of his team
team.
is
Right.
at. And it's so I understand a lot of that, the oftentimes I call it the Bermuda Triangle. You
Right.
could be at any one of the 2 points and you're fine. But if you find yourself in the middle, dude, it just isn't going to work. So you have to gravitate towards one extreme or the other. I think then the other piece of this is the best way to minimize some of those, I would say, gray area is to make everything black and white. Well,
Right.
people don't like that at all. They don't like black and white, but yet only from black and white can you understand, okay, here's the flex.
So when I had an agency, and this is going back, maybe it was COVID had passed. Everyone, this is in Los Angeles. We had about 20 employees, and we wanted everyone to go back to the office. I tried to mandate back to the office, and nobody wanted it. And I just ultimately just had to say, all right, nobody wants this. Like, I'm not going to force you all back.
Yeah.
Now going to a company like 1.5 million people globally.
Well, wait a second. Let's hang there where you're at.
Okay, go ahead.
So you weren't able to mandate. But if you did, what would have happened?
I just think it felt.
Let's go back to Patagonia when they mandated people move within 60 miles of their office.
Right.
What were they really doing?
Right. I kind of felt the same way. It's like, what is everyone really doing? But I will say people were performing their jobs well. They were showing up to meetings when they had to. Everything was running and operating smoothly. I personally like being in an office, so I enjoyed it. I like being around people and, a lot of creative conversations, looking at editors' work. I like that. I think it was, but then they all, then my vice president was like, Alex, and we had a meeting for about an hour and she's like, listen, all the editors, they're working really hard. Everyone's showing up, producers, blah, blah, blah. And basically proving to me how, no, this is running and well, and they don't really.
Wait a second. Let's stop. Had you forced everyone say, no, I am drawing the line in the sand. You're either in the office or you're done.
I think people would have got up and left. I honestly,
let's just speculate from your experience. How many people do you think at that time, it was a little different environment than we're in now, but how many people do you think would have given you a finger, walked out the door?
Well, so I had 20 people, so I would say probably 5 to 7 people, so a quarter
would have just left.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Let's stop and understand, what do you think Amazon is doing right now?
I think people might leave.
I think they want them to leave. I'm dead serious. That's what they're aiming for. When I see what's going on and look at this, is you can't take away from and to me, we've talked about this before. We talked about it with Patagonia. It's a bad way to call people.
Right.
A bad way to call people. But if you've gotten to this point, it's like, all right, we're here at this stage and we're looking around and we're like, all right, we're probably a little heavy on people.
Right.
And we're finding out that we're heavy on people, but we want to get back to a style where we're in the office together, because there were just some intangibles that worked better in our office structure. And
Right.
so instead of having to play the game of, well, I like Alex, but Tyler, well, Alex does great work, but Tyler's willing to be in the office. All right, but they're even like,
Let them
I'll
choose
take
their
Tyler
fate.
because he's willing to be in the office, right?
Yeah, I know you bring up a great point. I think, yeah, a place like Amazon can do something like that, because even if they 1.5 million employees, if 100,000 of them left or quit because they're unhappy, they go, okay, either
That's a
they replace some of them
7%
or that's to
staff
get that what they
reduction.
want. Yeah, they go, that's what we
Exactly.
wanted the whole time.
Well, and that's what I think is going on here with a lot of these organizations that are saying, okay, we want to evolve back into the structure that we had. And we're willing to make a mandate, because the only way for us to get into that place is say, pick or choose. Do you want to
Right.
work? And I think that's what's also understanding is that there are people that are like, I never want to go into an office. I want to live in the middle of northern Idaho in the mountains, have phenomenal internet service, and be able to look out over a beautiful lake and
Right.
watch all the wildlife. I don't want to live in, suburban Seattle.
Right.
And that is what's happened in that area. There are
It's expensive.
hundreds of people that have flocked to that part of the country in the last 40 years because of that. And so what they're saying is like, hey, like you, but here's the other thing that's interesting about that is when you have all of those employees, it's more difficult on HR.
Oh, I couldn't even
Because
imagine.
when you have an employee that is in the state of Idaho and you're set up in Washington, what are you now doing with payroll? Now, it's a lot of automated, but every single payroll, you are running payroll through the state of Idaho as well, because they're an employee there.
Yeah.
And so therefore, if you get rid of those remote workers and you say, hey, you're living in this state, then all of a sudden you're like, now that works for Seattle office, Virginia office, for Amazon. That doesn't work. That doesn't work in maybe other locales around the world. But I think, again, when we're looking at how do we deal with cost structure, how do we look at, the overall business, I think part of this mandate is absolutely force reduction.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, I'm just kind of going through the articles again. There's so many headlines because this is a global company. In London, actually, because this is a BBC article, the government might be getting involved here, which is interesting. Where the government getting involved with corporate, I guess, decision making on this issue. I mean, England's been in the news a lot recently for a lot of different censoring, but this is another one. It's like, oh well, no, you can't tell your employees what to do.
And I think what's going to force there is at some point the company's like, all right, fine, I don't have to have employees there.
Pull them out.
Yeah, and I think large organizations such as Amazon. One of the articles referred back to, and I think this is what's going to cause some issues too, is now you look at, okay, you're forcing people to either move back into that area or move in that area, and the cost of living, what has that done? How does that affect, salary, cost of living basis, all of those things? It's also one of the mentions was, well, is this causing you're going to have a reduced talent pool?
Mm-hmm.
I think when you look at a couple of the different, education streams, I think companies said, we want to limit the talent pool because it's a way for us to limit the talent pool. And, the number of people that I know that have, worked in either remote jobs or whatever, guys, male and female, that have applied for jobs, and there'll be 400, 500, 800, 1,000 applicants for one position. And it's a way for them to say, all right, how do we manage this? And how do we streamline and say, unless you're willing to work in office, we're not going to look at you. Well, now all of a sudden that goes from 1,000 to maybe 20.
Yeah. I think it's man, it's such an interesting topic. Um, if I were them, I would
Okay.
work from
You're
office.
if
I
you're
mean,
Amazon.
yeah, if I'm at Amazon and I have a good paying job, I mean, there's so many benefits of working for a big entity,
Yeah, yeah.
right? You know, that I think are great. And if that was my career trajectory and I liked my job and I liked what I do, there's a lot, right? There are a lot of variables that go into this decision making. But if I like my job, I like what I did, I got well paid, I would go to the office. I don't have a problem with it. And if from what you say, Jassy sent an article like, hey, if there's things you need to do, go take care of business
Yeah.
and not be here. I don't have a problem with it personally, but they are getting, you know, if you Google this, there's a ton of articles where they're just Amazon's getting shit for it, and you know, employees are pissed, and you know, they rather go back to school than go work and get paid by Amazon. It's like some of it's I think a little ridiculous where people have gotten very comfortable working from home 100% or even having that flexible work schedule, but and they kind of have to go, well, do I take the risk and quit or take a severance or go try to find something else? Like my boss wants me to work from office. He thinks we're going to have a stronger community, sense of increased creativity. You know, all of those things that you do get when you work closely with people in an office. And he thinks that's best for the company. I trust him or her, and that's what I'm going to do. But I'm a lot of people don't want that,
Well, which
presumably.
I think what's going to happen is a lot of people don't want it. Are you going to have people that, quiet quit?
What's quiet quit? Hold on.
Quiet quit is when you just stop doing your job, but you come to work.
Oh,
I mean, it's or in very much in remote is that they don't come to work, they don't do work, but they're still, they haven't resigned. And it
right,
takes leadership to act and say, what are you doing? And or you're fired.
right,
And, depending on, your location and the politics of that place, there's a lot of companies that are extremely hesitant to fire people because of the massive amount of red tape. They will rather pay people and leave them on
right.
staff rather than fire them because it has become so daunting to fire someone.
Yeah, which
That
they might
is a
do.
reality. I think again, I don't, there's always more to the story.
Yeah,
And I think more to the story here is we want to bring back a nature of doing business. And the only way for us to bring back that nature of doing business is to mandate it and draw a line in the sand. And I would envision and guess that there's going to be people that say, hey, no. And if they're willing to have the conversation, there's probably going to be some type of exemption. But if they're out and gone, then fine. You're out and gone. Even if you were extremely productive, whatever else,
right.
you know what? If you're that person, they're going to them and saying, hey, how can we make this work? Right?
Yeah,
Let's understand really what's going on, especially if you've been here a while. But so much of our, I would say, newer workforce, and
yeah,
I don't think the discussion is, is one more productive than the other? I don't think that is a part of this. And we've brought up articles, you've talked to
right.
articles about proving that, in office, out of office. I don't think that is a meritable conversation because I think that varies on every single person. And
Yeah,
so there's some people that are wildly productive in an office. There are people that are wildly productive, fully remote. There are people that are wildly productive, hybrid. And I think what it comes down to is we're businesses that are saying we want to have a full office type workforce. And then there are, I never had worked in an office until I was 12 years into my career. Had never been in an office because my sales role, my personal role, there was
Mhm.
no office component to it. It was 100% remote.
Right.
And it was interesting. I enjoyed parts of it, but I also had a ton of flexibility. I also had flexibility to say I didn't have to, or if something I needed to, it was 3 o'clock. I needed to run, 3-4 miles away, pick up my kids from preschool, bring them to my office. I had that flexibility to do so, but I was still required to be in an office. And I think that's where, again, we're just changing the landscape of employment. And part of this change is drawing the lines in the sand.
One thing I forgot to mention, this week is actually the International Week of Happiness at Work.
Okay.
That is a real thing.
Let's go. Yeah.
September 23rd.
What are
to
you
September
doing to
23rd.
celebrate, man? What are you doing to celebrate?
I'm here at work. I'm going to play with my kids
There you
and
go.
make dinner and go swimming.
All right. Well, see, I mean,
know?
that's great. I have my my coworker, Honey. She is chewing on a bone, and we're just good. And yeah. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting discussion. We've seen this from organizations. We're going to see more of it. There are obviously people that are going to be upset, and rightly so. That's just a part of, for example, say that, the days that you are working with different organizations, and I've had this happen. I know people that have relocated, businesses that have relocated.
Yeah.
And, they've moved from, like you moved from California to Florida. And that happens. Businesses happen. That happens.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you walk in one day and we're moving, and employees getting an uproar. How can you move? You can't move. You're taking our job away. It's like, yeah, we can.
Yeah.
And if it's better for the business environment, like I expect Boeing to really have conversations and leave Washington because it's a train wreck on their employment side. Amazon may find themselves in some locales where like, we're out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just going back, we talk about this a lot. There seems to be a lot of jobs still being cut, right? Across major organizations, pulling back hours at banks for employees, 80-hour work weeks now for those young employees.
Yeah.
There does seem to be this corporate slowdown happening in preparation for something, right? And we obviously have an election coming up, a lot of uncertainty of what's going to happen with corporate tax cuts and all sorts of things that do factor into all this. Energy, I think a lot of it goes back to energy, which we talk about a lot. And if you're one of those people that are unhappy, and this is for me, I would really think about the global and just, I guess US if you want to, but just what's happening here in the US. And if you're willing to risk, not just saying, I don't want to go back to the office for whatever reason because you're happier at home, maybe be lucky that you actually have a job, because there's a lot of people that are losing their jobs right now. A lot of job cutting happening.
I think, again, and this is a piece of it, I think as we move into the fourth quarter of this year, from a financial, from a fiscal, we're looking at how do we make sure that, we play the stock market game, play that analyst game, but as well, how do we prepare ourselves for something that we don't know it's coming, but if we're prepared for it, we can better manage it.
Right.
Every situation, whether you go back to playing football and sports, is like, if you anticipate it's a possibility, you are in a much better place to handle it than if you think, oh, it'll never happen, and you get blindsided. And I think that's probably what's going on with many different organizations. They're looking at the landscape, looking at different things financially, understand what's going on. It's like, if we were to cut 7 to 10% of our workforce, yeah, that probably wouldn't be a bad thing, because guess what we get to do then? We just get to go rehire.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, we decided, oh, things look great, we're going to rehire. Well, then all of a sudden, it's not a bad deal. But if you have a selective reduction in workforce, and then you get to go rehire, you also get to reestablish their salary base.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those benefits, but that you get to say, yes, there's losses in maybe morale, mindset, but it's how each leader internally manage this. Again, I believe we're gonna see more of this, not less.
You think we're gonna have more mandates back to office?
Yeah, but I think it's going to be more mandates back to office. We're going to see more layoffs. We're going to have more, type of restriction, constriction, different things affecting our workforce as we move into the fourth quarter of this year, as we move into this election, as we start looking at more and more of the global dynamics. I mean, the
Yeah.
stuff in Israel is not slowing down. Here we've
Right.
been going Ukraine and Russia crisis for, multiple years. I mean, it's just dragging on, and
Right.
those things take a toll on the economy.
Yeah. I agree. You know what's I was just thinking about this. Kind of going through the articles. Most of them are, how employees are. Anytime you see something like this, it's always an article about employees unhappy. I don't think I've ever read an article where, like, employees are happy they get to go back to the office because they've been lonely.
Who's
And
going to click on that story?
well, that's what I'm saying.
Who's going to click on that? We're not
I don't-
talking about that. We're not
Right.
talking about, Amazon has a return to office. They expect productivity to be up 15% and everyone's happy about it. No,
Right.
those aren't the people calling into Business Insider and say, hey, let me tell you what I think about this.
Yeah, every article you read is employees pissed about one thing or the other.
But that's the media that we have today, that
course.
everything is, let's look on the downside of it rather than the upside.
Right. Well, I was just kind of alluding back to this Forbes article on International Happiness at Work Week, is that there are a lot of people that do prefer working in an office, and I've worked with people and have talked with people, that do like going back to an office because they're lonely. Maybe they're at home all the time. They don't want to talk to. There's a lot of people like that as well.
Totally.
And so, but they don't. No one really ever talks about that. It's always the ones that are pissed off and upset about. What is this? This is garbage.
I mean,
how can you do
the
this?
last little thing I'll layer in is that is a big opportunity in leadership to understand what culture do we want, what do we have. For example, my sister works in an office where they were given opportunity to whichever it was during COVID and so forth, and she preferred to work in the office. She's in her late 20s. She was a remote online class education. And she just found I was more productive. I liked being around people.
Yeah.
And I think when you start looking at that as an organization, is we like to have people that like to be around people. I think that's something that it's okay if you're like, hey, I am wildly productive by myself and that's where I work best, then do you find the role that allows for that? Great. But if you're like, no, I'm a collaborator. I love to be around people. That's when my energy flows the most. Man, I love that. I have to find ways to do that. But I also know, man, I can be wildly productive when I'm sitting here in my studio all by myself.
Right.
And I think it's just, as part of leadership is understanding, where does your organization work best? Where are you accomplishing what you're aiming to do best? And then being willing to make that happen. And I think that's what we're seeing play out here.
Do you think that corporations really need to rethink about the office, like what the office is? Physically.
Maybe we should consult Michael Scott.
Dunder Mifflin Paper Company.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, I think that is absolutely because of, and this has gone on for 15 years. It's why that show was so popular, because people could relate to it.
Yeah.
Now we're in the midst of rewriting all of that. What does it look like? We have generational changes. We have more baby boomers that are exiting, retiring. We have more Gen Xers that are now in total leadership. We have, millennials that are in leadership. We have, this Gen Z that is starting to really come to office and say, well, no, this is what my world is like. And so, you need me, I need you. Like, there's less Gen Zers than there are baby boomers. That puts a crunch on the workforce. We have to, I believe the next 10 years are absolutely going to be driven by this dynamic.
I just go back thinking, the open office concept was like a big thing, 15 years ago. And then before that it was like cubicles and like, no. And then you work from home, but it's your own room. So I'm going, are people going to want to be, hey, I like my own private space and we have a communal space we all meet in? Or like, I'm so interested in physically how an office dynamic should work, because you go from basically having your own private space, right? Wherever that may be within your house that you work, to I have to now see everybody and look at everybody while they're working. Like, does that work? Or people, kind of get like, hey, what are you, what are you looking at me?
Here's where I would go with that is we need to go look and find out what education, the leading educators, the people that are really doing a good job and not just rubber stamping education, but the people that are saying, all right, how does this generation learn the best? What are they doing? What are current structures of high schools? What are current structures of trade schools? What are their structures? What do they find works best? That'll determine what the next office space looks like.
Yeah.
If I really, and maybe I need to go do just kind of a walk around in my kid's high school. It's a larger high school. It's new for them. It's like, all right, what's the dynamic here? Where have you guys found that students do the best? That will inform what the next workspace looks like. If Amazon wants to, how do we build for that next generation of workers that are Gen Z, that are graduating high school, graduating college, that 4 to 6 year gap? Man, what do they want and thrive on? That's what's going to be the next wave of office space.
Where does Amazon hold their ground, you think, till January of 2025, or do you think this is an ongoing story and we're going to continue to hear more and more about unhappy employees? What's your prediction or speculation?
Tell me what the economy does when the election is over and done with.
So November.
Tell me what happens then. Does the next 40 days of kind of back and forth here in the US, because it's a global impact. Whatever happens in the US will affect global economics. And whatever happens here, we just had an interest rate cut. We had those things. As that continues to play out, that will, to me, determine, are we going to see more or less, or how are people positioned? What happens when, we start to see, all right, is the current administration trying to buy votes? Are they effective doing so? Well, then they have to pay the piper, right? You buy votes, you got to pay for them at some point, right? And, if that's what's going on, or is this really policy change that is starting to really play through, that now we see interest rates drop, we see fuel, energy costs drop, but, are those short-lived? We had somebody stop by our house the other day, and they're talking about putting together a massive push for alternative energy panels, solar panels.
Right.
Because the largest energy provider in the state has informed we will have a 20% increase energy costs next year.
Just straight up, we're going to
straight up 20%. Bam.
Wow.
Okay. One, how does the state manage that? How does the region manage that? How does that affect, the national economics of life?
Yeah.
Remember, this is also the state where Boeing sits. And Amazon.
Amazon and Boeing in a really fun state over there, Tyler.
Yeah. Anyway, to me, that's what, and again, I don't care which candidate gets elected. I think it is going to have massive economic impact.
Last question for you, because you're in Washington. Do you stay in Washington at this point? Or do you?
For how long?
I don't know. Now that you've mentioned it, like Boeing, Amazon, energy costs, like it's all in your state, which is interesting. And I just kind of like, how are you thinking about this?
We have 3 kids in high school. A daughter that graduates this year, a sophomore in high school, and a freshman in high school. We do our best to try to keep our eyes open and say what's going on. But it's also, okay, how do we navigate things knowing, we'll be in this state for another 3 years-ish, for sure.
Right.
At this point, unless there's something dire, drastic that happens as far as move on, we will be. After that, there'll probably be a different situation. Now, in the meantime, could we end up, buying a home in a different state, renting here? Quite possible. You know, our kids' high school is 5 miles, not even 5 miles
Yeah,
from the
border.
Washington-Idaho border.
Yeah.
Like, okay. So there's ways that those dynamics, and we're very much in a place to play that. And,
Yeah.
you know, I know so many people that do the same. And
Yeah.
you know, it's also a, you know, not everyone has that ability depending on where you are around the world, around the country, specifically. But man, we are seeing more of a divergence in politics and economies by state that, you know, we saw a large, you know, political, you know, relocation, financial, economic relocation during COVID, right around COVID. I think depending on what happens with some of the policy over the next couple of years, and it has nothing to do with party, in my opinion.
Mhm.
It's how do we either continue on the path or how do we reassess the path that is going to greatly affect where people live. I do believe this. I think that we're going to see more of the states that were losing population might continue to do so. And the states, well, I'll go back. The states that were losing population when I was turning 18,
Right.
the Rust Belt, the Midwest, everyone was going to the coast. They were going to California, they were going to Florida, they were going to all of
New
those
York.
places, Washington, New York. Now, I think what we saw during COVID is we saw some of this coming back. And I think you're going to see more people that end up in Nebraska. I think more people are going to end up in Iowa. I think more people are going to end up in the Dakotas. I think more people are going to end up in Idaho. I think more people are going to end up in, you know, Oklahoma. I think people are going to move back there partly, and this is entirely because companies are going to say, we're moving there because it's more viable for us to do business.
I was going to say, what happens to Washington State if Amazon and Boeing leave? That's like hundreds of thousands of jobs. I would have probably affecting 1 million people.
Why don't you go ask what happened in California? What's happening in California? To them, they don't need them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll see. I mean, how does it play out? I mean, here's the next big factor, right? Is when you lose all of that income, is how do you claw back on it? Like, where does it come from? Well, you have to raise tax, or you have to find novel ways to increase income. And that's what's going to be, you know, the big part. Yeah. All right.
Anyway.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for partaking on Monday Newswire. Remember to hit subscribe. Also, the bell on YouTube, so that way you get notified for each podcast. We release a podcast each Wednesday, but we have Monday Newswire where we kind of just riff on current headlines every Monday. Thanks for being here. Till next time, choose to lead with impact.